Okay, we are days away from the Emmy nominations, and there's a lot of unanswered questions here, but we're going to try to answer them for you. Joining me now are Gold Derby contributors Amanda Spears, Riley Chow, and Tom O'Brien. I'm Zach Laws, and we're going to be talking about the races for drama series writing, and drama series directing. So, Amanda, last year we had something that was unprecedented in the history of the Emmys. We had 5 first season shows get nominated, knocking out shows that got nominated year after year. We never see that. Now, I guess we're pretty much expecting all 5 of those shows, The Handmaid's Tale, This Is Us, The Crown, Stranger Things, and Westworld, to potentially return. We've also got the return of Game of Thrones. We've got the final season of The Americans. We've got a couple of new shows like Mindhunter and Killing Eve and Ozark. But here's my question to you. Of those 5 first season shows that are now coming back for their second season, what is most likely to have an uptick in nominations? What is most likely to have a drop-off in nominations? And what, if any of them, are the most vulnerable to potentially be left off? Go.
Obviously, The Handmaid's Tale will probably have an uptick because it's the reigning champ along with Game of Thrones. Most likely to see a little bit of a drop would be Stranger Things or Westworld. Westworld wasn't as strategic in their submissions as they were last year, and Stranger Things had a couple so-so episodes.
Mm-hmm. Riley, what are the most likely new shows that are going to get in? I mean, last year, we had these 5 that were very buzzed about, and it was just kind of like a sure thing that they were all going to get in. This year, I mean, is there a show that has that kind of buzz that they could knock out one of these returning champions?
Well, what everybody's saying is Killing Eve, because it got a leading 5 nominations from the Television Critics Association. Now, I can't tell if that's just one of those weird things that the TCA does, like in the first season of The Americans when they nominated it in all the categories and it didn't get into, series or acting or writing, directing at the Emmys, or even like Empire, which for some reason the critics latched onto and also went, almost nowhere at the Emmys. Or maybe it's like last year when the TCA was kind of ahead of us, I would say, on The Handmaid's Tale and also This Is Us. Killing Eve, I feel like I'm a little disappointed in the campaign for it, which is probably just a budgetary thing because it is BBC America. It's not Netflix. It's not HBO. But they only sent voters 2 episodes, I believe. Maybe Tom can say otherwise. But it came in the large BBC America box. It didn't come individually packaged like, say, Ozark or Mindhunter, which were individual shipments that the voters got. So voters, they have those 2 episodes, and then, they have a streaming link that they can watch the rest. But it's not readily available like you would hope a new show is. If you compare it against The Handmaid's Tale last year, The Handmaid's Tale came in the big Hulu box for the first half of the season. And then the second half of the season, they sent out as its own shipment. So, it's like if you didn't see it the first time, here's another reminder, and here are all the episodes for you to watch. So Killing Eve, it really has to get this nomination off its own merit, off its own buzz, that kind of thing, just through word of mouth, hoping that enough people will check it out. The show that I'm actually betting on to break in is Mindhunter, because even though Mindhunter has consistently underperformed at the precursors, it is a show that I think was widely seen and also widely liked. And it's also a prestige drama. It's a serial killer show, so it's very accessible. I don't see how in, the kind of voting system where you just check off all the shows that you like, how it doesn't get in, unless, we really are in peak TV and something's got to give.
I really wish that Killing Eve and BBC America would have learned their lesson from Orphan Black. And if they realized they really had something with this show, which they do, waited till the fall. Let it go through the Globes. I'm sure Sandra Oh is popular enough to get a SAG nomination. So it had more momentum going into the Emmys. I think it's kind of in that similar position where, Sandra Oh could win and I still would not nominate her. Put her in my predictions for TC. She could win at TCA and I still wouldn't change my predictions because I think it's a very similar situation because the critics fell all over Tatiana Maslany that first season. She won the TCA award, she won the Critics' Choice Award, and she couldn't get in till the 3rd season. So hopefully BBC has learned their lesson a little bit, but I don't think releasing this the way they did, they have.
Yeah, sorry to talk again, but like voters have to have seen it right now. It's not like Unreal or Mr. Robot that came from these kind of, more obscure networks from the Emmys where they had several months to hear about it from their friends and then, figure out, am I actually going to watch this, and then do it. They have to have seen it kind of when it premiered.
Yeah, it wasn't the hot new show like if it had premiered this fall, for example, Sandra Oh and Killing Eve might have given The Handmaid's Tale a run for its money and bumped it out of the winner circle. So yeah, I'm gonna let Tom speak since Ryan and I keep going back and forth.
I wanted to target a question at you specifically, Tom, because everybody is The Handmaid's Tale won last year, but it's never gone up against Game of Thrones, which won 2 years in a row before it. So what are you thinking in terms of nominations? What are you looking for to bet on one of those shows or the other?
In terms of number of nominations, it's still going to be tough to rival the below the line that Game of Thrones will mark up. But I agree with Amanda in that I think that Handmaid's Tale is the one show that I think is going to have a significant bump up in nominations. If there is something that's going to be going down, I would say Westworld. Its timing is right, but so many episodes just left people scratching their heads. And I think Stranger Things is going to go down. It's been so long since that second season premiered. And I've been talking to my friends, several of whom are Emmy voters in various categories, and nobody talks about Stranger Things anymore. What they're talking about is Killing Eve. So whatever BBC America has done to raise its awareness, its timing may be good. Is it enough to knock off one of last year's nominees, especially since The Americans has turned so hot, especially with its season finale? I don't know, but I think that it's Killing Eve is a more accessible show than Orphan Black was.
Let's talk about
it. I'm just saying, as far as like their release schedule, I think they really should have realized in their heads, like, okay, we've got something this time. Let's wait till September, and then we'll release the show and have this build up where it's the fresh, hot new kid and win a couple Golden Globes, get Sandra Oh a SAG nomination, whether she wins or not, and then we'll go to the Emmys. And there will been all of these months to see this small show. It's not a small show, but on a smaller network.
On a smaller network, yeah. I just wonder whether they knew what they had, whether they knew they had a potential strong hand here, or it was just another.
They should know because they've been through the Tatiana Maslany thing. Someone there should know they had something with this because they got Sandra Oh, who was on ABC for how many years.
And it may follow the Orphan Black pattern of just getting actress the first year. I do have her on my list.
It took 3 years for her to get an actress nomination.
That's true. That is true.
I'm one of those people where I can't put it in. But I think, I know usually a new show gets into the top 7 or is nominated for Best Series. I think since we saw 5 new shows last year, I think not having a new show is not going to be the biggest deal this time around. But I think even with an uptick in nominations, I don't think Handmaid's Tale can win again.
Well, let me ask you.
I agree.
Because, let's talk about that for a minute. Because one thing that I hear a lot from people who are fans of the show is that, great show, but boy, is it hard to watch. Do you think that's what it is that's going to potentially keep it from winning, or is it just the presence of Game of Thrones, or are you betting on something else?
I think it's a combination of two things. One, I think they took their stuff way too far. I mean, they really went over the line as far as what a person what should be seen. Mm-hmm. Second, I think the fact that they had absorbed all the book material, and this isn't an author who, if she said, hey, I got a Handmaid's Tale 2 book, they would have thrown a truck of money at her to write that book. She never thought about these characters again. So I think they kind of struggled a little bit with what to do next based on the first 3 episodes and then them just kind of resetting back to the house. I think Game of Thrones could do it, but I also worry that maybe, depending on how This Is Us performs, if it gets all 5 in, if it's main cast in, if it gets a drama writing or directing nomination, if it gets both, it could win, because it's going to be, I think it could just come straight up the middle and win this. And I think NBC needs to be smart and realize this is their best chance to win drama series. Don't worry about comedy. Don't worry about Will and Grace. Throw your money behind This Is Us.
We did see it earlier this year, win the SAG Ensemble Prize. I mean, if there's one thing that you can say about that show is that actors love it. Even though they didn't get all the family members in last year, they got 8 acting nominations. We're going to talk about acting in a separate podcast or webcam. Yeah, I mean, This Is Us, I think, it is in the race for this. I would say the ding against it is that, we'll talk about this in a minute, but, there are people for whom that show is just kind of maudlin and manipulative. I think that actors certainly love it because they get to do a lot of big speeches and big reveals during it, and they can have miscarriages and opioid addictions and die in a fire and all that kind of stuff. But for some people it might be perhaps a bit too on the nose. So that's why I wonder about it being the consensus pick.
Well, I think if it was like a rank system, or rank ballot like they do at the Oscars in one category, which frankly, I think if you're going to have more than 5 nominees, you should do, because I don't think anyone should win with 16% of the vote. I think in a ranked ballot, it probably would be most people's number 2 or 3.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where if you don't want to vote for Handmaid's Tale because it's gone too far, and maybe you just don't want to vote for Game of Thrones again, I think your next choice might be This Is Us.
I want to talk about The Americans because, this is a show that it took 4 years for it to get in, and then it didn't get in last year. But it had a really buzzed about last season, especially the season finale. I mean, a lot of people were talking about it. Our video interviews with those folks, on the red carpet on the night of the finale premiere just went through the roof. So, could this be the kind of, the show has had a kind of sketchy history with the Emmys before. Could we see it kind of get a farewell hug from them?
Yeah, it could pick up a rise. It could pick up a prize. I think it's the most likely of the shows not in the top 7, but maybe in the top 15 to be nominated. And it could, Matthew Rhys, Harry Russell, and we'll talk about them later, but we could see a Friday Night Lights situation here, which makes me very nervous.
Sorry, you go ahead, Tom.
I was just saying that I've always had a problem with, I'm not a regular follower of The Americans. So whenever it's Emmy time and there is an American script that is up for consideration, I will watch it, and I don't know what the hell's going on. Who's who and what's what, and I can appreciate the good writing. So I approached the finale, which is called Start, with some trepidation. I loved it. I understood everything about it because they lay it out so well, and they give everybody their due. And there is a dynamic scene in an underground garage between the family who are trying to leave and their FBI agent neighbor that is so impeccably written that it's like, I love this show. Where has this show been all my life? I think I would be, I certainly voted for it on my ballot, and I would not be surprised if this took the Emmy this year for writing.
I'd say the sensible thing to do is to have the 5 new shows from last year, Game of Thrones and The Americans, and probably skip the rest of this video because if you want a good prediction score. I don't have The Americans, though, because it's only gotten in 1 time out of 5 seasons. And, this is the third time that it's the most critically acclaimed drama of the season. I don't think the Emmys particularly care for it. I mean, the last time that it got in, Homeland and Mr. Robot were nominated, and it's not like we're considering them just because, House of Cards and Better Call Saul are out. The Americans, it did have, an uptick in acclaim, but, it was still very acclaimed last year. Why did it fall out? And ratings were down, so even though it is better, not as many people saw it. And that goes also for, DVR ratings. It's not just people who are watching on the night of.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other thoughts in this category? Any other shows that could get in? I don't know, The Good Doctor or...
No, that's not going to happen.
We haven't talked about The Crown.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Crown's in, and, it's going to stay in on Prestige, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but it's going to get a writing and a directing nomination easily.
I think it'll probably get about the same number of nominations that it got last year. And
roughly,
actually,
it might do a little better.
Obviously, John Lithgow's not there. But actually, so let's use that as a jumping off point to talk about
Actually,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I'll make the case against This Is Us, because everybody thinks that it's coming back. And because, like you said, there's one thing that we know is that actors love it. What we don't know is, has anybody else even seen it? It's great that it has the support of the acting branch, which is about 10% of the Academy, but it hasn't been nominated for writing, directing, editing, cinematography, etc. I mean, it's easy to see how it doesn't have as many nominations as some of these craft heavier, genre period piece shows, but it's also falling short of what it could have, potentially. I mean, even the Emmys, they keep expanding categories. They keep adding categories for just contemporary shows. Or you have a category like sound mixing, where, is Better Call Saul, does it really have such impressive sound that it should be getting in over This Is Us? And you look at the guilds, where it won SAG, and it was nominated by the Casting Guild, and it was nominated by the music supervisors, and nothing else, even though they have so many more categories. So I could see a scenario where in the end it wins because of the vote splitting, because I think all these shows are more likely to be, their fans are more likely to be fans of each other. And This Is Us is just so different. But I could also see a scenario in which This Is Us is not really the kind of show that the Emmys are moving toward in general anyway. So maybe it came in for, network TV came in for one last stand last year, and then now it's just over.
I think it's a fair point. I mean, there could be, oftentimes we do see like the hot new show that comes in for the first season and then just doesn't come back in. I don't know if it'll necessarily be This Is Us, but I think that's a good point to make. One show though, we talked about Westworld getting a significant drop in nominations, but this was the damnedest show last year. I remember, I think that just as many people hated it last year as they hate it this year. But I mean, it led the nominations last year.
I think it was more confusing this season. Like you almost needed to find a recap of the show to kind of know what's going on. Like you needed a podcast, you needed to watch the behind the scenes story. It got so bogged down in what it was doing, and that's kind of what tripped up Lost.
I do think just the sheer the craft categories will all those like steak eaters and below the line people.
Yeah, I mean,
probably keep it in there.
Yeah, it'll stay in the nominations for at least one more season.
Yeah.
It's how much damage does its presence do to Game of Thrones is more,
and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think most of those categories will go back to Game of Thrones. I don't think visual effects. I mean, there's episodes of Game of Thrones that cost more than the Best Picture winner this year. Like, you can make an Oscar-winning film for less than you can make an episode of Game of Thrones. Like, you're making it rain in Scotland for that show.
Oh my God!
So why don't we move on to writing? Tom O'Brien, you're a member of the writers branch. You mentioned ticking off a vote for the Americans. What do you think is going to get in for drama writing?
Westworld really kind of blew it by having 4 submissions. That was nuts.
I thought they had 5.
Did they have 5? Oh gosh.
I thought it was 5.
I did vote for one of them, The Riddle of the Sphinx, which was not quite a standalone, but it made sense. It was written by Jonathan Nolan, co-written by Jonathan Nolan, and it was a solid piece of writing. The Handmaid's Tale, I believe, only submitted the premiere
just
episode.
the one,
yeah. That's a tough sit. It's well written, but boy, oh boy, it didn't make me want to come back right away. I just needed a little time off after that. And I voted for The Crown, and I voted for Killing Eve. I thought that premiere episode of Killing Eve, really delineated those characters very well, had a very convincing story, and gave Sandra Oh a character that she could really sink her teeth into. So those were my 5. I think The Handmaid's Tale is probably the only one I'm absolutely sure will get in. Although I suspect the Americans might.
Right. So, I mean, we should say that the last few years in this, so Handmaid's Tale won last year. We're betting that it's going to get in this year. The Americans has been in for 3 years in a row, so that's probably a safe bet. Game of Thrones won this category 2 years in a row. They only submitted 1 episode, so it's likely that they're going to...
Was it the season finale?
It's been I guess it was. Yeah. It's been so long since the show aired. I can't.
I'll look it up. Never mind.
It was.
And The Crown. Those are the 4. They all submitted.
I do worry about The Crown because I think they submitted the wrong episode. I think they should have gone with Vergenheit.
Yeah. But I think that Peter Morgan. I think that they might think of that as voting for him for the entire series in a sense. I don't know. But
I don't know why he can't be nominated for the entire series. If you write every episode, I think you should be allowed.
Yeah. Last year, we saw writing nominations also for Westworld and Stranger Things. Better Call Saul is not back in the race this year because it hasn't aired yet. This Is Us. Let's talk about this. Last year, they submitted several episodes, did not get a writing nomination. This year, they submitted 2 episodes. They submitted their Super Bowl episode, and they submitted the episode that came immediately after that, the car one, right? So is it going to get a writing nomination, Riley?
Yeah, I mean, it could, but it's the same thing with Blackish, where, just because it's a series nominee, it doesn't mean that it's also going to be a writing nominee. We've seen them try a couple times to submit just 1 episode, and it hasn't worked out. And although they did submit 5 episodes last year, Better Call Saul submitted 7, and they still got nominated because they had, a singular standout episode that people could tell from the other ones, chicanery. But so did This Is Us, because they submitted Memphis across the board in all categories instead of the pilot. It was one of only 2 episodes that voters got on a DVD with the pilot. And the episodes that they submitted for writing, it says, the title, the air date, and the episode description. The other 4 episodes all aired in the fall. Memphis aired in the spring. And, Memphis, the episode description was Randall and William, drive to Memphis where William reminisces. It's very hard to confuse that with one of the fall episodes, which are just, about whatever's going on with the family. So I think if they had support from the writers branch, they could have gotten in last year. So I don't have them in this year, although they could get it.
I think that This Is Us can get in because when I look at the description for Super Bowl Sunday, I mean, they don't tell you exactly, none of them tell you exactly what happens, but it says, following a dramatic house fire, the Pearson family is forever changed on a fateful Super Bowl Sunday. I think most people know this is the episode. It doesn't matter about the car. This is it. That is the episode. I think they can get in. I worry about Mindhunter because I think it's almost such a interesting writing achievement to take this really complicated, kind of almost autobiographical book and turn it into this really show you really just want to sit down and watch all 10 episodes in a row. It's almost like, you just got to finish it because it's so good. But I do worry that they didn't submit the pilot. They went with the finale.
Well, I mean, the finale was like a buzzed about episode, especially with, since that's also Fincher's submission, which we'll talk about in a bit. This will be a real test of whether or not the writer's branch actually does like This Is Us. Because I think, like you said, Riley, I mean, you can chalk it up to, well, they submitted too many. But we have seen shows like Better Call Saul submit 7 and still get a writing nomination for their standout one. So it might just be that the writer's branch does not like the show. We know, again, if actors were voting for writing, that would get a writing nomination in all. It would get
nominated in every category. If the actor, I mean, I think Stranger Things is the one that falls out this year. I don't think it's going to pick up another writing nomination.
No.
I think I'm just looking at what they submitted. Yeah, I think they submitted the finale. 9 was the finale.
The thing about the Super Bowl episode is that it made news outside of just fans of the show. People knew about it, and because it came after the Super Bowl, so many people saw it who might not have picked up a DVD or might not have been a regular viewer of it. And you have that, we'll get to her in a second, but that great Mandy Moore scene in the hospital where she just brings it. Yes, it's very emotional. I don't think it's maudlin though. I think she really does a great job on it, and I still think of that scene. So that particular episode is still in my head, and it may be in the head of other writing voters.
And I think Game of Thrones could still be the front runner to win this because they submitted the series finale, and the one big buzzed about thing about this series finale, well, they had 2 buzzed about things. One is like the first 20-30 minutes were all of these cast members who've never been together. Like that was that's a big buzzed about moment. And then it answered their big question as far as who's Jon Snow's favorite. Unfortunately, he was doing something with his aunt, which is, another problem. But I do think it could win writing. They do like that show, and they do like that writing duo.
Now, you mentioned both Killing Eve and Mindhunter, and I could see those being like the first season shows that get into writing. I mean, we see things like the Unreal pilot, for instance, getting nominated,
and that was a good writing submission.
Yeah, and like last year, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the writing nominees were for first season shows. I could see those being the 2 that get in. Do we have any final thoughts on writing before we go over to directing?
I don't know why Ray Donovan submitted 6. Like, you're never going to get in this category. Like, seriously.
Maybe this year they get all 6 slots.
I think long gone are the days when a show could get 3 or 4 of these slots. So, like, people need to really...
Yeah.
I know that, like, This Is Us. I'm sure there are writers whose feelings were hurt, but this is the best. This is putting them in their best chance. Personally.
Yeah, for them personally.
The Americans, The Crown, The Deuce, Game of Thrones, Handmaid's Tale, Killing Eve, Ozark, Stranger Things, This Is Us. Those are shows that submitted the showrunners exclusively. Whereas Westworld actually, threw a bone to some of their other writers. Said, good job.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a difference between, like, just using Breaking Bad as an example. Like, Vince Gilligan was submitted for the finale and got nominated. But if they didn't submit Ozymandias, that would have looked like a real a-hole kind of move. Like, because we all know Ozymandias is the episode of the season. So if they didn't submit it, and some of those shows I just don't think have another episode where it's like, if they don't submit this, they look like they're being greedy. Like, so I think it's fine, personally.
All right, well, let's talk about directing. So last year, Handmaid's Tale won. The 2 years before that, Game of Thrones won. Now they're going head-to-head. Game of Thrones submitted 4 episodes. Handmaid's Tale submitted 2. They got 2 in last year, so they can get 2 in again this year. We've also got, coming back from last year, we have The Crown, Stephen Daldry. He's the only submission for that show. We've got Homeland, Leslie Lincoln Glatter. She gets nominated every single year, even when the show is not nominated. Stranger Things has got 2 submissions. Westworld has got 4 submissions. We've also got David Fincher with Mindhunter. He's a previous Emmy winner. I think he could win again. We've got Trust with Danny Boyle, but they also submitted a bunch of other directors. And then we've got This Is Us with submitting, I believe, the same 2 episodes they submitted for
smart.
writing.
Very smart.
So then, Riley, what do you think? What's getting nominated for directing?
Oh, I think it'll be very boring. I think we're getting 3 Game of Thrones, 2 Handmaid's Tale, and 1 David Fincher.
Well, there you go.
Not Mindhunter. But I think the difference is, first of all, the new voting system where now they can tick their favorite shows, and they don't have to think about, oh, maybe I want to throw a vote to a different show, because now they can vote for all of them because they have unlimited slots on their ballot. And Game of Thrones, they have gotten in twice at the Emmys where they've gotten 2 episodes nominated, but they've never had that before at the Directors Guild. And this year, the Directors Guild gave them 3 slots. And they don't have this new voting system where they can take off, whatever they like. There were a lot of voters who clearly were just voting for Game of Thrones as much as they possibly could, and then they voted for something else. So I think we could see that at the Emmys. And having said that, there are several cases of penultimate seasons at the Emmys faring worse than they ever did. I've got a list here, Mad Men, Downton Abbey, Boardwalk Empire, The Office, Lost, The Sopranos, The West Wing, 6 Feet Under, The Practice, and Frasier. These are all shows that got fewer nominations than they ever did for their penultimate seasons. And even though Game of Thrones, they won their last 2 years, it does feel like at this point they've been amply awarded and they've been gone for so long that I could see it being the case where voters kind of feel like that's old news and they move on to other shows despite the Guild performance.
I should say I forgot to mention The Americans as well, which is a show that's never been nominated in this category before. But, since that finale was so talked about, I think you have to kind of consider it, as being a dark horse for this nomination. Tom O'Brien, what do you think? What's getting nominated for drama directing? And let me also pose this to you. If Riley's correct and we see like 3 Game of Throneses and 2 Handmaid's Tales and 1 David Fincher, does the 1 David Fincher stand out with all this vote splitting? I mean, vote splitting has never affected this particular category before. Game of Thrones both years and Handmaid's Tale had direct competition. But, could that be the case this year?
It possibly could. The thing is that Mindhunter is not appearing in any of the categories that we've talked about so far. So it would be a lone nomination. And yes, they'll have David Fincher's name on it. So I agree with Riley. I think he'll get in. My guess is 2 Game of Thrones, 2 Handmaid's Tale, David Fincher, and The Americans.
Yeah. I think David Fincher's chances rest on whether or not Mindhunter can get into drama series if he's going to win. Because we've seen with Steven Soderbergh with The Knick, which nobody has watched. He got in.
I've watched it.
Yeah, I watched an episode. I watched his submissions every year. He would get in he got in twice, back to back. But they didn't go, well, he's Steven Soderbergh. We can just check his name off. Mm-hmm. It has to be in a show that's possibly going to win drama series. So I think his chances rest on whether or not Mindhunter gets nominated. I think 2 Game of Thrones, 1 Handmaid's Tale, The Crown, Mindhunter, and then maybe This Is Us for the same reason, because they have that, as far as network TV goes, they have that big Super Bowl episode, which everyone's seen. It's their most visible episode.
So we think that...
I don't think Stranger Things gets back in, and I think Westworld submitted too many episodes.
Right.
Agreed.
What about, I mentioned, Leslie Lincoln Gladder gets in every single year. Is this going to be the year she doesn't get in?
Possibly. I think there's just so much competition.
Yeah.
What about Killing Eve, that being the hot new show? How many did they?
I don't think it's a director's. It feels like it would be a writer's thing. I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge she's the Brit that they love to, no offense, Tom, to to put in there. She's got the snob appeal for such a young writer. She's got plenty of snob appeal to get in. I don't know if directing wise it can sneak in.
I don't think it will.
I'm looking at the ballot right now for Homeland, and they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 submissions.
Yeah,
Madness.
Half their episodes.
Madness.
As if it was 2011.
But that's what's different about the directing ballot is that it does have the names, so they're always able to find their Leslie Lincoln Gladders, their Paris Barclays, and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely, if I was making a list of top 10, I think she would be in there. But you've got those 3 Game of Thrones episodes. And I think the Spoils of War is like just like the Battle of the Bastards. It's just this big, huge, epic episode, which the director's branch loves. They love the most of anything, or they love pilots. And since we're probably not going to have a pilot in there, we're probably going to see Game of Thrones.
It's tricky because the director of the Spoils of War, like, he's best known as the producing director of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like, he's not Alan Taylor, who's won before. He's not, or for The Sopranos and been nominated for Mad Men. He's not Jeremy Podeswa, who just did these episodes of The Handmaid's Tale, who's been nominated for Boardwalk Empire, who's been nominated for Game of Thrones. So, like, we did see Miguel Sapochnik, who won for Battle of the Bastards. He wasn't nominated the year before for Hard Home because people didn't know who he was. And in the director's branch, that really means something. Like, they didn't nominate Ozymandias. They went with the Vince Gilligan finale.
That episode got so much buzz. I mean, it was a huge, huge episode of the show. It probably single-handedly won them for I mean, it's going to win a ton of Emmys for stunts and visual effects. And I do agree that usually the name matters, but if they remember that episode at all,
well, if they remember it.
But otherwise, the season finale, you do have the effects. You have this huge, kind of very intricate scene with all of these stars. You do. It could be the season finale. We have seen sweeps for the episodes. Battle of the Bastards won. Mother's Mercy won. So if it is the dragon, the wolf and the dragon, I can't remember what the name of the episode of the season finale is.
Close enough, yeah.
It's close enough.
The fox.
That could be, the sweep this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we shall see. We're going to leave it at that. Please join us for another one of these lively discussions. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Tom. We will talk to you very soon.